Okay, this video is on quadratic formula. Quadratic formula. Now, in our textbook, this is section 9.5, but in other textbooks it's different. This is in my Algebra 1 textbook for big ideas. The middle school textbook would have it in a different section. The Algebra 2 textbook has it in a different section. But it's the same thing in all the levels. Okay, so we're not going to start by deriving it. I'm going to have a separate video for that. But right now I just want to show how to use it. Okay, so and what it's used for. So what it's used for is equations that look like this. I'll write them to the side. 2x squared minus 5x plus 6 equals 0. Okay, so it looks like that. Now, we math teachers call that ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Okay, and then we call this 2a, and the negative 5 is b, and the positive 6 is c. You do need this equals 0 here. Okay, and then we use the formula from there. So we'll say what... we'll call A, B, and C numbers because they're specific numbers within each problem. They're called constants, okay, or coefficients as well, based on their location. So because you see this x squared, that's why this is called a quadratic. And the equal is the reason it's called an equation. Okay, so this is a quadratic equation, and we're going to solve it using the quadratic formula. Okay, so the quadratic formula is to solve quadratic equations. Okay, and the quadratic formula is something you definitely want to memorize. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, and then it's all divided by 2a. There's a way to remember it. There's lots of ways to remember it. I'll make another video on how to remember it. But you can just look online. There's songs, there's stories. I have a story that somebody gave me, but I'll put that in a separate one. So that's practicing memorizing it. But right now I just want to show you how to use it. Okay, so example 1. Example 1, we have x squared minus 3x plus 1 equals 0. Now this one's very unique because it doesn't have a number in the front. Okay, so this is supposed to be A, this is supposed to be B, this is supposed to be C, as long as first you have a 0 here. But A seems to be missing, so try to remember what's the number in front of a letter, what's the coefficient of a letter if there is nothing there. And you'll remember that it's a 1. Okay, so A is also 1. So at the beginning when you're doing it, usually people write out what the letters are, so you don't have to keep looking back at the equation, or what the numbers are, I guess, what A, B, and C are. And then you're going to want to write the formula each time. Okay. Think of it when you used to write your spelling words over and over and over again to practice and get them in your head. You're going to definitely want to write this formula down each time that you use it, because we need to have it in your head forever in math up through college. So definitely the quadratic formula is something that people expect that you know. Okay, it's popular like Pythagorean theorem and y equals mx plus b. Okay, so this would probably be one of maybe the third most important formulas in math after Pythagorean theorem and y equals mx plus b. So this is definitely one to add to the list of things to know. It turns out that that we're not necessarily this year able to teach these concepts in class, but it's still important that you learn them. You could just see them for the first time next year in geometry or the first time in Algebra 2, but it benefits you to have practiced it ahead and not just learned it just one time and then you're expected to be an expert. So this is kind of your first time to see it. Okay, and then some of you, this might not be your first time and you're reviewing it, and that's okay too. Okay, so let me show you how it works. So negative b. Okay, so if I look at b here, b says b is negative 3. So negative b would be positive 3. Okay, so that's going to be positive 3. Okay, so negative b means the opposite of b. Okay, now usually when I do this, I just square the b in my head. Negative 3 squared, I'll write it over here. Negative 3 squared, and when I do things in my head, I usually put it in a bubble. So I just do that in my head, and then I get 9, and usually I put 9 directly into the formula. However, some of you are going to be using calculators, okay? In my class, we usually don't use calculators on this. But if you are going to use calculators, it's real critical that when you put the negative 3 in this formula, that you put it in parentheses. Because in a calculator, and you can try this on your own calculator or in your phone, if you put in negative 3 squared, or you put in negative 3 squared, you don't get the same answer. This one you get positive 9, because this means negative 3 times negative 3. But this one, the calculator doesn't give you positive 9. That might be what you mean, negative 3 times negative 3. But what the calculator sees is negative 1 times 3 squared. And then it does exponents before it does multiplying in PEMDAS. So that would be negative 1 times 9. So the calculator knows order of operations, so it gives you the answer of negative 9, which is not what we want. So often, I'll just do this in my head, and I'll just write it immediately like the next step. Let me show you. So I often just write it as a 9, and I don't show the step above. I show the rest of the step, I just don't show the negative 3 squared. Okay, minus 4, parentheses, a, and then you look up a. So a here in my blue highlight is 1. Okay, so a is 1. And then c, c is also 1. Okay, so c is also 1. That's a coincidence. Usually they're not both the same number. So c is 1. And then you want to have the whole formula in every single part of your problem. You don't want to just have the top half and then later add the bottom half in. That's not what you want to do. So 2 times a. A was my front blue, which is 1. Okay. So now the biggest key here is right in the middle. People often miss this middle sign. Some of my students in this class this year were doing something that I hadn't seen before, which is they were trying to distribute this negative 4 to both ones. It's not about distributing. It's actually about combining these 3 numbers here together. So I was highlighting, but I wasn't having my class highlight. I'm thinking that highlighting will be better. What I do is I take the numbers, and I ignore the signs for the moment, and 4 times 1 times 1 is 4. Okay, so 4 times 1 times 1, I just work out the numbers. And then I decide on the sign. So the sign is the biggest thing people miss in quadratic formula. So what you have to do is you have to look in the yellow and see how many negatives you have. So if you have 1 negative, then it's negative. Okay, so in the denominator, 2 times 1 is 2. So we get 3 plus or minus. The square root of 9 minus 4 is 5 divided by 2. Now the 5, in later problems, we're going to need to make a tree for 5. We're going to need to simplify it. Or sometimes it'll be a perfect square, like 9, and then you know the square root of 9. Or square root of 16, square root of 49, square root of 25. Okay. And then there are 2 answers here, but usually we just write the answer combined. But what the plus or minus means, let me highlight that for you, the plus or minus. What the plus or minus actually means is it means 3 plus square root of 5 divided by 2, and then separately 3 minus square root of 5 divided by 2. So it means that you could type those in separately to the calculator. So there are 2 answers. This is 2 answers, separate answers, but usually we combine them and we put them together. Okay. And some teachers, all we teachers are picky about different things, but I do know that I have one of my best teacher friends. She really likes having the X in the front because that's what you're trying to solve for in the question. And so then it helps you know what are you solving for. I don't usually put the X in my answer. Okay. we all do what we learned. And we just had different teachers when she and I were in high school. Okay, so let's look at another one. So x squared minus 6x plus 8 equals 0. Now, first you want to look at this. You do need an equal 0, like in zero product property, which will be in a different video. Okay, there's a 1 in the front here. And then it's a good idea, especially if you're a beginner, to label specifically what A, B, and C are. It also gives your teacher the chance to see what error you're making. Okay, so the B is negative, and you do have to grab the signs when you do these. Okay, so I'm going to use the quadratic formula. Now, this is not the easiest way to do this specific question. To do this specific question, it is actually easier to factor. But we're practicing the quadratic formula. The beautiful thing about the quadratic formula is it works every single time. Factoring is a shortcut, and it works sometimes to solve equations, and sometimes it doesn't. And then we have a lot of different methods that we'll learn in this chapter about how to solve quadratics. The quadratic formula does work every single time. Okay, I'm just going to write over here negative 6 squared. Okay, just so you could remember that in parentheses is what you would have to do if you did type it into the calculator, but I'm going to show you what I usually do. I just put the 36 in directly. Minus 4 times A, which is 1, C, which is 8. And definitely put the signs in if there were any negatives. Divided by 2, parentheses A, which is 1. So this is 6 plus or minus the square root of 36 minus, okay, now I check all these again. So I also highlight that sign in the middle because, as I said, the biggest error is right here. So you're going to want to double check that sign. So I multiply 4, 1, and 8. So over here, 4 times 1 times 8 is 32. And then I double check the sign. So 36 minus 32, 36 minus 32 is 4. Okay, and is it a minus? Let's double check this sign here in the middle. Okay, so that minus in the middle. So what you're going to do is you're going to count how many negatives there are in the yellow highlighted area. Okay, and how it works, let me write this in another color for you, is right here. You're going to look at these 3 areas, these 3 sections. Okay, and technically, I guess you're going to look inside the parentheses. So you're going to look inside the parentheses, inside the parentheses. Okay, if there's 1 negative, it's negative. If there's 2 negatives, that's a positive. And if there's 3 negatives, then that's a negative. This is the most common error that people make in the quadratic formula. Okay, so then we have 6 plus or minus the square root of 4 divided by 2. Now, I know the square root of 4. So the square root of 4 is plain 2. So when you have that, it's plain 2. Now, you'll see me writing that. I started writing that this year because some people, when they take the square root, they'll keep the square root sign on it. So they'll put a square root here, okay, which is not correct. Okay, so that's not correct. You know the square root of 4. It's 2. It's regular 2. It's not square root of 2. So you can't keep the square root sign. Now, if this number here is a plain number, it's called a rational number. That's its official name, but you'll think of it more as a number without a square root. Then you're going to split it. So 6 plus 2 divided by 2, and 6 minus 2 divided by 2. You're basically just writing 1 plus and 1 minus. Okay. Now, this I can work out. This is 8 over 2, which is 4, because remember the over really is a divided by. And this is 4 divided by 2, which is 2. So your 2 answers are 4 and 2. Technically, like I said, for the other teachers, they might want an x equals. So then over here, the answers would be x equals 4, and then x equals 2. It just depends. You got to make sure that whatever your teacher wants is what you do, because your teacher is the one that's going to be grading you. Okay. And all we teachers have different things that we want to see. I want to see the quadratic formula written on each one, and if my student doesn't write the quadratic formula, then I definitely take points off. Okay, this is example 3. So example 3 is 2x squared plus 4x minus 4 equals 0. So a is 2, b is 6, c is negative 4. Now I did that first, but you know what? My teacher brain looks at the equals 0, and I already saw that the 0 was there. But technically, this is the first thing that you should do. Okay, because sometimes they're not in the right order, and you have to move things around, and you have to get the equals 0 first. But right now, we're just practicing the very, very basics. Okay, so write the formula. Okay, and you want to write the formula from memory and then check it with your notes before you get started, because you don't want to practice it wrong. Okay, negative b. Okay, so you should pause this and try it on your own. So you should be writing this in your notebook. Pause it, write it on your own, and then you can unpause me and see if we get the same answer. Okay, so not the whole answer, but you know, each step. Okay, so opposite of b would be negative 6. B squared would be, I'm going to take this blue number and square it, so that's 36. A and C, let's see what A is. A is 2, and C is negative 4. Divided by 2, and then A is 2. Okay, so we have negative 6. On the bottom we have a 4. 36 days. Okay, so let's highlight this middle part. Okay. And even if you don't highlight it at home, you definitely want to highlight it in your brain when you're working these out. So 4 times 2 times 4, I multiply those out. That's 8 times 4, that's 32. So that's 32, like the last problem, actually. Okay, but what's different is right here, the negative, positive, negative. I have 2 negatives. Now 2 negatives, when you multiply them together, is a positive. So this sign in the middle is a positive, not a minus. Like I said, that's the most common error people make with the quadratic formula. Negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 68 divided by 4. Do I know the square root of 68? I need 2 things that multiply to give me 68. What? 7 times 7 is 49. 8 times 8, 64. 9 times 9, 81. Okay, I passed 68. So that'd be a no. So it's not a perfect square, so it's not a plane number. But we are supposed to simplify it. Okay, so I'm going to make a tree. Different people simplify things different ways. I like to make a tree. Okay, so 68. You have to think of any numbers that goes into 68. Now, numbers that end with 0, 2, 4, 6, and 8 are called even numbers, as you know. So if they end in those numbers, that means 2 goes in. Okay, so 2 goes in evenly. And that means 2 is a factor. So you could do 2. And then you can divide by 2. And maybe in the past they told you erase your scratch work on the side. I would say don't. I would say leave that for your teachers to see. Your high school teachers definitely want to see that. Okay, 6. And then bring down the 8. How many times does 2 go into 8? That's 4. 4 times 2 is 8, 0. So that would be 34. And then that's 2. And then 34. What number goes into 34? Well, it's even again. So let's try 2 again. So 2 into 34. So first thing you do is think of the number. What number goes in? 2 you multiply by the front number. 3 you subtract. 4 you bring down. And then you repeat, go back to step 1. So what number? 2 into 7, or 2 into 14 is 7. Then you multiply the 7 by the 2. 14, subtract, bring down, but we have nothing to bring down, so it's 17. Okay, 17. Okay, and then to simplify, we were doing this in the video on 9.1, so you can look back at the video of that. But basically, it's a square root, so the escapers are the twins. So -6 plus or minus 2 square root. I should write it down here, 2 square root 17. So 2 square root 17 over 4. Okay. And then remember in class when I was showing you this, I call it heart simplifying. Okay. And some of you are new to this video. You've never seen the quadratic formula before. But I call it heart simplifying. It happened to be that I was teaching it one day near Valentine's Day. Okay, so near Valentine's Day, and I saw, oh, look, that thing I'm drawing looks like a heart. Okay, so what number do you know? It's reducing, so I call it heart reducing or heart simplifying. What number do we know that goes into 6, 2, and 4? Now, these all have to be front numbers, outside numbers. The 17 would not be applicable. So 2 is the answer. And then you divide them each by 2, so -3 plus or minus 1 square root of 17 all over 2. Okay, or it is also okay to drop the 1 because that 1 specifically is a multiplier 1 and it's not needed. So both answers are correct. Okay, so I want to show you the possible ends. Okay, I call them the ends. So that instead of doing the whole quadratic formula, we're just looking at the end part. Okay, so what if at the very last step, okay, so your last step, you had -3 plus or minus the square root of 24 divided by 4. Is that okay to leave it like that? And my answer would be no. Now, I don't know the square root of 24. Okay, I'll call this example. We'll call this example 4. I don't know the square root of 24, so it's not going to be a plain number. So I'm going to make a tree. Okay, so make a tree for 24. So you think of any number that goes into 24. So 6 and 4, 8 and 3, 12 and 2, any possibility, except you don't want to use the one with 1. And then this is 2 times 3, this is 2 times 2. Are there any twins that come out? These two twins come out 2 square root of the numbers left inside, and then you re-multiply those. Okay, so 2 square root 6. And then I do heart simplifying right here. Do I know any number that goes into 3, 2, and 4? And the answer is no. So that's the answer. So that's it. Okay, so example 5. We're just doing partial examples. We're just doing the end part. Okay, so let me show you another one. If you have, let's say, -3 plus or minus the square root of 25 over 4. So how does 25 change things compared to 24? So -3 plus or minus, what is the square root of 25? So the square root of 25 is plain 5. I'm going to write plain, just so you remember not to write the square root on top. Now, when you're using your notes to help you do the homework, what you want to do is you want to look at previous questions, look at notes questions. Which one does this look like? So let's see. Which one does this look like? Does it look like example 3? No, that one still had a square root in it. Up here, example 2. Oh, that one, the square root of 4 was 2. Okay, so it looks like this one. Okay, so look at what we did. We split it, we added it, and then we worked it out. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so let's see over here. So we're going to do the same thing. So you're going to split it, -3 plus 5 divided by 4, and -3 minus 5 divided by 4. So that would be 2 divided by 4, -8 divided by 4. You might want to put +8, but just so you remember, this is down 3, down 5, this is down 8. 2 negatives multiply to be a positive. Let me write this to the side for you. But 2 negatives multiply to be a positive. But 2 negatives when I'm adding and subtracting, still give me a negative. So this is down, down, more down is what I call that one. Down, down, more down. And multiplying is the one that gives you a positive, not always. Two negatives don't always make a positive. Okay, so that is -8. And then -2, and this is, you can't divide 4 into 2. You could and get a decimal, but let's reduce it like a fraction. So divided by 2, that would be 1/2. So that's one of your answers, and that is your other answer. Let me show you a unique one. Okay, so a unique one would be, what if you have the square root of 0? And let me put the bottom as something more complicated. We'll say 24. Okay. Now, do you know the square root of 0? What two numbers multiplied give you 0 that match? 0, right? Okay, so you actually do get plain 0 here. Now at this point, sometimes people like to reduce, but if you did reduce, you'd have to use heart simplifying. So I don't reduce here. I do +0, and then I do -0, and I put them both over 24. -3/24, -3/24. Oh, look, I got the same answer twice. Later on, when we do discriminant, this is called a repeated solution. Okay. This one, it doesn't divide evenly, so I'm going to reduce it, divided by 3. So -1 divided by 8. And this is also -1 divided by 8, because it's exactly the same. So it has two answers, but they're repeated. So some people call it one answer, some people call it they'll call it one repeated solution, or they'll call it two solutions. Depends how you want to consider it. Okay. But they are two matching solutions. Okay, so let's just look at one more of these, and then we'll do another video on more advanced quadratic formulas. Okay, so this would be 4 plus or minus the square root of 12. But you don't really want to do more advanced quadratic formulas until you practice the other ones. Okay, now right here, if I tried heart simplifying, it doesn't work. No. Because that 12 is inside jail. So if it's inside jail, you can't touch it. Okay, you can't touch it. So what you have to do is you have to get a front number to allow yourself to do that. So first you're going to make a tree. So 12, that would be what? 3 times 4, 2, 2, 3. 2 comes out, 2 square root 3. Okay, and if you're not very good at that, you want to definitely practice that in another video. It's a little bit, you practice it a little bit in section 9.1 for me. But if any of you want any other videos on specific topics, just let me know and I can make another one. I did not make them of my class this year. So I don't have any. I did make them last year, but the app that I was using closed down. So all my videos were gone. So YouTube is not going to close down, so that's why I decided to use YouTube during our break. There we go. So it does simplify with our heart simplifying, and sometimes having names really helps. Okay, just one thing I want to mention that's going to be important in our future video is if you have 2x squared minus 6x equals, say, 19, you need a 0 here. So I don't have a 0 there. So you have to think, how am I going to move that 19 to the other side? And how you're going to move it to the other side would be subtract 19. Okay, so then you have 2x squared minus 6x minus 19 equals 0. And now you can use the quadratic formula. So this is not C in the ABC. This is C. And you'll notice it's different because negative 19 is different. And the same thing, if you had something, let me show you another one. If you have 3x squared equals 5x plus 9. Okay, you're going to have to choose which way to move things. Now, it is allowed to move the negative 3x squared to the right side. Oops, and then you put them in order. So you put the x squared term first, then the x term, and then the plain number. Okay, so you can do it that way, or, I'll put an or. Okay, or I usually like my 3x squareds positive. So I would subtract the 5x and subtract the 9, equaling 0. So that was a little fast right there, but I just wanted to tell you what the future. So this is going to be future. Okay, so this is going to be in our future video on the second part of quadratic formula, which will include this, and it will also include deriving the quadratic formula, which is making the quadratic formula. That might have to wait. Actually, that might have to wait for another video because I have to teach you how to complete the square first. Okay, hope everyone is well. Bye-bye.